Good morning and welcome to our worship here from Killin Parish Church, and a warm welcome to everyone in the villages surrounding. Let's begin with our great affirmation. Christ is risen. He's risen indeed. This is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Let me begin with a prayer that I've used before. Lord, in you we live and move and have our being. In the sunshine of the mountaintop, you are our God. In the dark valley, you are with us. On the seashore, gazing at the horizon, you are our God. In the storms of life, you are with us. In laughter and love, you are our God. In tears and pain, you are with us. In the vigor of youth and health, you are our God. In the limitations of illness, age, and infirmity, you are with us. In the mystery and wonder of life, you are our God. In the womb of death, you are with us. Lord, from the rising of the sun to its setting, from the flowing of the tide to its ebbing, from the flowering of life to its fading, grant us your peace. Let's light our candle. The light of the world has come. Jesus is the light of the world. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will never overcome it. Let's go into a time of quiet, silent, personal prayer. You may want to pray for lots of things, but since it's a short time, I would suggest you just pick one. You may be concerned about something internationally. For example, I know some folk are horrified at some of the things that are happening in the United States just now. Or it may be nationally, something in our country. Or it may be locally. It may be about a friend or a family member or a neighbour. Or it may even be about yourself. And it's not selfish to pray for yourself. God is here for all of us. So in the quietness, let's come before him in prayer. Lord, draw near to us now as we open up to you in the peace and the quiet. Lord, in your mercy, hear all of our prayers. Amen. Let's recite the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Reading from Scripture, and we're following on from where we left off last week in the book of Acts, when we were celebrating Pentecost. Peter addresses the crowd. Then Peter stood up with the 11, raised his voice, and addressed the crowd. Fellow Jews and all of you who live in Jerusalem, let me explain to you. Listen carefully to what I say. These people are not drunk, as you suppose. It's only 9 a.m. No, this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy, your young men will see visions, your old men dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. Well, I hope you've had a good week. I've had a very good week for 2 reasons. Firstly, I discovered a Stones album that I didn't know about. From my early days, my youthful days, I was a Stones fan. Over the years, I wasn't impressed with a lot of the stuff they were producing, and I think in the late 90s, an album came out that I thought, they're kind of past their sell-by date now. They're kind of just going through the motions. Of course, in recent years, they've done Glastonbury Festival, and of course, they've still got it when they do it live. But I discovered an album called A Bigger Bang, and I think I'd heard something about it. It came out in 2005, but I hadn't really picked up on it, and I certainly didn't get it. Well, this week I came across it, and I've been listening to it, and boy, does it rock. I've been practicing. My air guitar has become very good over these last few days. And the reason it's so impressive is that when they produced that, after all the criticism of the previous album, they went back to their roots. And their roots produced what is typical of the Stones. They really can rock when they get their act together. And alongside that, my reflections, personal reflections of Pentecost and some of the reflections from the Manse I've done over the weeks, and my own personal journey of faith, trying to get back to the roots of it all. If someone had asked me prior to this pandemic, are you ready to retire? Because I could have retired in April, although we delayed it to next April, and of course now we've postponed it again. But I would have said, oh yes, I'm ready. After 34 years, I was feeling kind of tired, a bit jaded. Also, a wee bit down in the dumps about where did it all go wrong. In the 1980s, I was a student at university, and there were so many of us who were training for the ministry, full of passion and vigour, going to go out and, in the sense, do our bit for God in the church. But these past decades, the church has struggled, and it's been in decline, and that's not been easy. And I suppose a part of me was just ready, well, I've done my time. I gave it my best shot. I'm looking forward to retirement. Of course, this pandemic's put paid to all of that. It's also forced me, like the Stones, to go back to the roots of what this faith is about. And having to do these Sunday services is weird and strange, looking at a camera, which I'm not used to, and also doing the reflections from the Manse. But I have been empowered by coming to terms with what this faith is really all about. And one of the weekly reflections was based on Paul Simon's song, Still Crazy After All These Years, and I subtitled it Still Christian After All These Years. And that was a deeply moving week for me, reconnecting with what brought me into the faith to begin with and what has sustained me down throughout these years. So let's get back to the passage that I've read. Here's Peter after the blessing of the Holy Spirit and the accusation by the crowd that these guys are drunk. Of course, he says, no, it's only 9 o'clock in the morning, we're not drunk. And here's Peter addressing the crowd. The same Peter who weeks before had denied Jesus. He had cursed, he had lied, and of course, then he cried like a baby for betraying his master. He was a broken man. Fast forward, Peter stands up before the crowd in Jerusalem to preach the first Christian sermon. He was a man transformed, a new man, a new faith, a new hope, a new life, empowered by the Holy Spirit. And he goes on to explain what has happened. And his aim is to say, listen, something has happened in Jesus Christ that has changed the world. There's no turning back. It's onward and forward in faith from this moment. And the message is clear. As for Peter, so for you and me, the transforming power of God. So, what is this passage about? Well, Peter quotes the prophet Joel. Now, the prophets in the Old Testament are often thought to be a prophet is to predict something, but that was only a part of it. Most of the prophetic sayings are forthtelling, not foretelling. They're the message for now, for the situation that the prophet was in. But there was also the hope of the Messiah coming and a new age dawning. And there are prophecies to that effect. And this is what Peter quotes. In the last days, God says, I will pour out my spirit on all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions. Your old men will dream dreams. Even on my servants, both men and women, I will pour out my spirit in those days, and they will prophesy. And then the rhetoric builds up. And you've got to remember, we live in a visual age, and also we live in an age of books. In these days, they didn't. They had the written word, but they were in scrolls. And most people had never seen a book because they didn't exist, and they hadn't seen a scroll either. So a lot of it was oral. Therefore, when people were speaking, it was communication by words, and therefore good speakers use great rhetoric to capture people's imaginations to get the message across. And this is the language that Joel uses. I will show wonders in the heavens above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and billows of smoke. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood before the coming of the great glorious day of the Lord. And everyone who calls in the name of the Lord will be saved. Now, these last couple of verses, the language and the rhetoric is known as apocalyptic. And that usually is dramatic imagery to relate to the convulsions of history. And my goodness, the people of Israel went through plenty of them. They were at the intersection of the great empires for all of their history. And so many things were happening, but they saw God's hand in all of this. And the prophecy of Joel, Peter sees as happening in the convulsions that the disciples were going through because of what happened at Easter and then at Pentecost. And that drama can only be explained and communicated in the great rhetoric of Joel's prophecy. So what we have here is Peter indicating that we're entering a new age, the Messianic age. So there's the preparation for the coming of the Messiah, all the history of the Old Testament, the twists and turns of the people of Israel. The coming of Christ initiates and inaugurates the Messianic age. And we're living in that as we are propelled towards the future. So there's a preparation, the actualization in the coming of Jesus, then of course the great consummation at the end of all time. And we are caught up in that flow. We're called Christians. And the word Christ is a Greek translation for the Hebrew word meaning Messiah. So the very label we have indicates we believe we're living in the Messianic age. Let me give you an example. Think of Loch Tay, okay? Now, all the water table that flows into Loch Tay, of course, it's gathered up in smaller burns and rivers into the Lochie and the Dochart, and then that flows into the Tay. Think of that as the preparation, the twists and turns of the Old Testament and the people of Israel, and the many strands that come together into Jesus, the Christ event. And the Christ event is Loch Tay. But Loch Tay isn't sealed off. From Loch Tay, The river goes down all the way to the sea. So think of Loch Tay as the Christ event. So there's the preparation, all the twists and turns of history to get to the Jesus event. And then there's the flow from that out into the world, which is the church, heading towards the great consummation at the end of time through God's providence and merging, the river merging with the sea. And that's the illustration. It's a new and wonderful age, and the church has been called into being to represent that to the world. This is dynamic, it's incredible, it's a message that is for everyone. And of course the passage finishes that everyone who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. When was the last time you called upon the name of the Lord? My grandfather, who I was blessed to know as a young boy before he died, he used to share with me the stories from the First World War. He was a machine gunner. He was in the British Expeditionary Force that went over, so he was a professional soldier before the war. So he was one of the first over. He lost his 3 brothers at the Somme, and he himself was wounded. But he was a church elder in Glasgow. And he remembers saying that often under fire, men would try to say the Lord's Prayer or even the 23rd Psalm, but they would get it all mixed up because they weren't really church people. They hadn't made a habit of faith. They weren't really in tune with it, but they knew something about it. And he often would try to lead them in the prayer or in the psalm. And sometimes people call in the name of the Lord only when it's an emergency. But God is not a Mr. Fix-It. You don't look him up in the yellow pages because you need something done. The faith's bigger than that. It's about why we're here, where we're going. It's a universal message to make sense of everything, make sense of the human condition, to give us a hope in the midst of all the twists and turns of existence. It's a fabulous, fabulous faith, and it's so deep and broad and high. But so many people just get little bits of it. But it can take a lifetime. And even after a lifetime of exploring it, you realize there's so much still to know. But the fact that God has called ordinary people to represent him. But the church often has been a little bit like Cinderella with amnesia, to quote the title of a book I read many years ago. Cinderella has a high calling. She's from a high background. But there she is. She sits in the dust and the ashes, forgetting who she is. And the church has often forgotten who they are, why they are, and what they're about. Most worldviews try to make sense of life, and there's 4 questions they tend to ask. How did we get here? What's the point of being here? Why are things the way they are here? And is there a way out of here? And I want to explore these very briefly over the coming week, because I'll start the reflections again. I had a break last week. I needed just some time off from the constant creation of reflections. But I want to resume this week, and I'm going to explore some of these. Not in great depth, because they're short reflections, but at least to touch on them as a sense of going beyond what we're saying today. So please remember that. So where are we? It's time for the church to wake up, to remember who we are, to remember why we are. We're called by God and empowered by God through the Spirit to share this incredible, dynamic, transformatory message. There is no other message like it. And as the Stones went back to their roots and produced a real rockin' album, we need to get back to our roots, and we need to rock again, because we've been entrusted with something precious beyond price. And it's a message that is never irrelevant or out of date, because it's a message, the only message, that can transform people the way the Christian gospel can. But it's up to us to be open to it, to ask the questions, to take the step of calling upon the name of the Lord and let his Spirit revive us and renew us and draw us closer into an experience that the early disciples had and faithful people down throughout the centuries have also had. And we need to have and find in this day and age, and especially during this time of uncertainty about the present and indeed uncertainty about the future. May God bless us in that endeavour. One or two intimations. As I said last week, there is bunting put up at the side of the church here in Killin, in the grass area, for you to attach a prayer or just a thought. There are materials provided with instructions. And of course in Balchwydder Church, it's at the front of the church, under the canopy. Materials are there with instructions. So although the church is closed, if you want to put up a prayer and come and see what other people have written, then please do that. It's a quiet space for you to come and just to reflect. Also, there will be a song, a link for a song at the end of this service. As I say, daily reflections will come from the manse this week, looking at the questions I mentioned. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and keep you. Amen.